I'm feeling very unqualified to do this video, but it's one that I feel like I'm being asked to do. The topic for today's video is characteristics of a godly wife. And if you saw my testimony video last time, you'll understand why I feel a little unqualified. But I think that is the point. Usually when you see videos talking about the characteristics of a godly wife, you hear the story of Ruth and you hear the story of Esther, and you're led to Proverbs 31, talking about the noble characteristics of that woman in Proverbs 31. And Proverbs 31 sounds really good. It's a mother's wish to her son for a noble wife. But as I was reading that, I was like, there's no way I can do all of this. I cannot be all things to someone. There's just no way. And at the very end of that proverb, what it says is that charm is deceitful and beauty fades. But the true characteristic, the true nobility of a godly wife is someone who fears the Lord. And really what it boils down to in Proverbs 31 for me is that this woman is just a well-rounded woman who takes care of her household. She's not all things to all people. She takes care of her husband, her children, and the house, the affairs of the house. But she's not all things to all people. And I think that that's really important to understand. But then what I wanted to do was kind of steer away from Ruth and Esther, and I wanted to go into maybe some of the other women in the Bible. And as I was looking at some of the other wives in the Bible, I kind of came to an understanding. Let's start with Sarah. In 1 Peter 3, 1 through 6, it describes Sarah as having a gentle and quiet spirit, which, like, the first thing I think of is peace, that her inner self was very peaceful. But that Sarah had a faith in God's promise to Abraham, that Abraham would father a child. However, when you read the story of Abraham and Sarah, you will see that Sarah did not go about things in the right way in bringing God's promise to life. Even though she may not have done things perfectly, like, God still came through on his promise, and Sarah still gave birth at the age of 90. And so even though Sarah was faithful, she wasn't perfect. Then I came to the story of Abigail. In 1 Samuel 25 verse 3, Abigail is described as intelligent and beautiful. And in 1 Samuel 25:33, David describes her as having good judgment, which I find odd because at the time that David says that Abigail has good judgment, Abigail is married to a man who is a fool, who is foolish in his decisions, who makes unwise choices. But yet Abigail herself is described as having good judgment. And in the story of Abigail, she became a peacemaker. Eventually, though, Abigail goes on to be David's wife. And David chooses her because of her intelligence, because she is seen as wise, because he sees her as having good judgment. Elizabeth. Elizabeth is the mother of John the Baptist. And in Luke 1, she is described as barren and getting on in years. But then she becomes pregnant. The angel Gabriel comes to her husband Zechariah and tells him that this is what's going to happen. But Zechariah is in disbelief and he questions the angel. He questions Gabriel. And Gabriel's like, okay, because you don't believe, you're going to be punished with silence. You are not going to be able to speak until this baby is born. But you're going to name him John. And this is what he is going to do. And so in Luke chapter 1, verses 39 through 45, Elizabeth shows how faithful she is to God. Because in verse 45, this is where she insists in honoring God by naming him John. And people are trying to argue with her and say, but nobody in your family is named John. Like, where did this name come from? Why are you insisting on this? And everybody's looking to Zechariah for answers. Zechariah cannot speak. He writes it down and says, name him John. And that is when Zechariah's punishment of silence ends and he is able to speak again and talk about his experience. But Elizabeth is faithful to God. She's obedient and she honors God. Then we have Mary. Mary, the mother of Jesus. In Luke chapter 1, verses 26 through 38, the angel Gabriel also goes to Mary and tells Mary that she is about to give birth to Jesus and who Jesus will become. And she questions it. But unlike Zechariah, she doesn't get punished for this. Gabriel seems to have more patience with her and seems to kind of talk her through it. And in Luke chapter 1, verse 38, Mary says, I am the Lord's servant, Mary answered. May it be to me as you have said. Then the angel left her. So she is willing. She is obedient. And then in Luke chapter 2, verse 21, Jesus was given his name that the angel Gabriel told her to name him. And so again, just like Elizabeth, she is honoring God by naming Jesus the name that he is supposed to have. I will say that because Jesus is who he is, his life starts becoming recorded more, right? And so I got the impression with Mary that she had a blind trust in God, that she was willing to submit to him, that she was saying, okay, let it be the way that God says it's going to be. She was willing to give birth to a baby that wasn't her husband's. This could have put a tarnish on her reputation. In Luke 2:19, after the shepherds come to visit Jesus after he's born, they go and they tell everybody what they have seen. And the Bible says that Mary treasured up all these things and pondered them in her heart. So it must have been a very confusing time for Mary with a lot of mixture of emotions. Like, hey, she just gave birth, so I'm sure she was hurting, but I'm sure she was happy. But then here comes these people that she doesn't know wanting to see the baby, and then they go off and tell everybody, hey, the baby's born. And she must have felt very exposed and vulnerable. But yet she still answered the call that God had on her life. And then in Luke chapter 2, towards the end, they talk about the feast of the Passover when Jesus was 12, and Joseph and Mary accidentally left him behind at the feast of the Passover. And they left him for like a day or more, and it was like a day's travel before they realized he was gone, so they had to travel back a day to go and find him. And they found him at the temple. I think Mark, Luke. A 12-year-old Jesus tells his parents in chapter 2, verse 49, "Why were you searching for me?" he asked. "Didn't you know I had to be in my Father's house?" But they did not understand what he was saying to them. And then in verse 59, it says, "But his mother treasured all these things in her heart." It says that she did not fully understand what Jesus was saying to him, but yet she understood that this was a different enough answer to pay attention to. And so how humbling it must have been to have to parent the Son of God when he spoke in a way that she did not fully understand. And what all of these women have in common is their love for God, their faithfulness. They each have a strength that maybe the other doesn't have, and they're all different in their own ways, but none of them is perfect. They're not trying to be all things to all people. They're trying to be what God asked them to be. And I think that that is the key to being a godly wife, that you don't have to be all things to all people. You are what God calls you to be. And as always, may the Lord bless and keep you. May the Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord turn his face toward you and give you peace. I love you. Have a great day.